What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, once again, shout out to the brother Aaron for showing love with a donation to the channel via the PayPal. Salute to you for showing love and truly a love of old school NBA. And I want to show some love to Alex English. I think it's the first time I've actually done a video talking about Alex English outside of my top 10 or 15 small forward listings. Um, you know what's funny about Alex English? The late LB of the Sports and Political Channel LB. When we ever talked about the golden age of the 80s into the 90s, he always told me how much of a fan of Alex English he was. And that makes a lot of sense. Being that Alex English is from South Carolina, like LB was. And Alex English wasn't the most flashy, flamboyant player. Most of his scores came in layups, maybe the occasional dunk, but it wasn't a rim rocking. It wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing game. Like I said, most of his scores came in layups or mid-range jump shots. That was his game. He wasn't, like I said before, he wasn't the most eye-popping player to watch. You know, his performances didn't show up on ESPN highlight reels. That plus, you know, when you look at the fact that he played in an era where the stars of the game were Dr. J, Magic, Larry, then maybe Michael and Isaiah. His teams never went to any NBA finals. They never went to any NBA finals. I think the best they did, if I recall correctly, I think it was 1985 when they went to the Western Conference Finals. So outside of that, they were always under the radar. Plus, he played in Denver, which has never been a huge market. And as a consequence of that, Alex English always been under the radar. Even the way his career started, he started slowly. He didn't come into the NBA gangbusters like Michael Jordan and Larry Bird or Magic Johnson. You know, Kareem. He didn't have a great start. I think he started his career with the Milwaukee Bucks, playing behind guys like Marquis, what's his name, Marquise Johnson. Playing behind guys like Paul Pressey, playing behind those types of guys. And he went to the Pacers, and he got a really slow start there. It wasn't until around 1980 when he was with the Nuggets that he started getting minutes. And during his 11-year career with the Denver Nuggets, not only was he the leading scorer of the decade, the leading scorer. Nobody scored more points in the NBA than Alex English in the 1980s. But he also, during that stretch, averaged nearly 26 points a night, 25.9 points per game, or nearly 51% shooting as a Denver Nugget. That 25.9 points per game is a higher scoring average than Larry Bird's during his 13-year career with the Boston Celtics, and had a better shooting percentage. Now, he wasn't as great a outside shooter as Larry Bird. He rarely took threes, but he was a mid-range master. He's one of the great mid-range shooters in the history of the NBA. Unfortunately, even though he scored well over 25,000 points, as a matter of fact, I believe when he retired in 1992, when he retired, I think he was 6th all-time in scoring. Now I think he's like 20-something, but at the time he was way up there in scoring. But he could have scored even more if he was on a bad team. but he wasn't a selfish guy. He did win one scoring title. I believe it was during the 1982-83 season when he averaged 28.4 points per game. I believe it was one of the lowest scoring tallies to actually lead the league in scoring, but he did lead the league in scoring one year. But he wasn't a selfish guy, and they had some really good teams, you know. But those Nuggets teams just couldn't compete with the Los Angeles Lakers. They just weren't good enough to compete with the Lakers squad. But as I said before, he was born in Columbia, South Carolina, and he attended Draher High School in Columbia. And after that, he attended the University of South Carolina from 1972 to 1976. He started every game of a four-year career, and most accounts say that he was the first African American sports star at that school. He scored a record 1,972 points and was the third player at that school to record over 1,000 rebounds and connect on better than 50% of his field goal attempts. Speaking of rebounding, Alex English was a very, very good offensive rebounding small forward. That part of his game doesn't get mentioned enough. He was a very good offensive rebounder, and because of that, that helped to contribute to the Denver Nuggets being one of the highest scoring teams in the history of the NBA. One of those teams, I think it might have been the 81, 82 Nuggets, I think it was, or maybe 82, 83. One of those teams has the NBA record for highest scoring average in a season, 126.5 points per night. And that was without, for the most part, three-pointers. But anyway, got a little sidetracked talking about that. English was selected to two independent All-American teams in 1975 and 1976. And English was drafted by the Bucks in the second round of 1976 NBA draft, the 23rd pick. However, at that time, he played behind Junior Bridgman, Brian Winters, the great Bob Dandridge. So I was wrong. I said Marcus Daniels and Paul Pressey. But he played behind those guys. And although he had flashes of potential and flash of greatness, he still hadn't broke through. And ultimately, when he became a free agent in 1978, he signed with the Indiana Pacers as a free agent. English became a starter in Indiana and began to establish a reputation for being a solid, productive, if not an all-star level player, averaging 16 points per game during the 78-79 season on another team that was undergoing a rebuilding process. English was traded to the Denver Nuggets midway through the 1979-80 season for George McGinnis, a former Pacers star from their ABA days. This wound up being one of the most one-sided trades in the history of sports, in the history of NBA, because the Nuggets were not aware of how washed up George McGinnis had become. No slight to George McGinnis, but I'm just saying. They weren't aware of how washed up he had truly become. And they gave up a true star in Alex English. To put emphasis on that, though coming off an all-star season in 78-79, McGinnis was only a shadow of his former self and was out of the league by 1982. And as I said before, English went on to become a perennial all-star in the 80s for the Nuggets. In his first full season with the Nuggets in 80-81, English averaged a then career high 23.8 points per game. During the next season, English averaged 25.4 points per game, and the team advanced to postseason play. He earned a position on the All-Star team and All-NBA second team. The following year in 82-83, English won the scoring title with an average of 28.4 a night, while teammate Kiki Vandeweghe placed second, averaging 26.7. In 83-84, English placed fourth in the league in scoring. The next year, 84-85, English raised his scoring average to 27.9 to pick up some of the slack from Kiki Vanderweij's departure. I think he departed to go play for the Portland Trailblazers, I think it was. Anyway, Denver won its division and secured the second seed in the Western Conference. In the 85 playoffs, English averaged 30 points, over 30 points per game, as the Nuggets defeated the Spurs and the Jazz to meet the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, as I said earlier, where they would fall to the eventual NBA champion Lakers in 5 games. English suffered a thumb injury in Game 4, which required surgery and rendered him unable to play for the rest of the series. Now, if he was able to play, would they have beaten the Lakers? I tend to think they still would not have, but who knows? English said in the 2006 interview, quote, "I think that if I had not broken my thumb, we had a chance to beat the Lakers." Maybe. English recorded his career best average of 29.8 points per game. The next year, 85-86, finishing third in the league behind Dominique Wilkins and Adrian Dantley. In the 86 All-Star game, English set his All-Star career high by scoring 16 points on 8 of 12 shooting in just 16 minutes off the bench for the West squad. In the 86 NBA playoffs, English led the Nuggets past the Trailblazers in the first round. In the Western Conference semifinals, English averaged 29.2 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists in a 6-game series loss to the eventual Western Conference champion Rockets. In the final game of the series, English tied his own Nuggets single-game playoff points record with 42 during a 126-122 double overtime loss. In 1988, English received the J. Walter Kennedy Citizenship Award for his community service efforts. On March 10, 1989, English scored 51 points, notably without attempting any three-point shots, and recording 9 assists during a 131-130 overtime loss to the Miami Heat. That game can be seen on YouTube if you choose to watch it. Another thing about Alex English is, in addition to his offensive rebounding prowess, he was also a pretty good passer. His assist numbers don't jump out at you, but when you look at those teams, of course, later on, of course, the point guard was Michael Adams. Back then, you had positional basketball. Point guards usually had the ball in their hands more. But Alex English was definitely not a bad passer. He could play make. After the 89-90 season, in which English's scoring average dipped to 17.9 and he largely struggled to maintain his double play, English became a free agent, and the Nuggets elected not to resign him. And he spent his last NBA season with the Dallas Mavericks, where he averaged just under 10 points per game. He played overseas for a year with Basket Napoli. And I said Nap because I think of Naples, Italy, but it's actually, I think, Basket Napoli. And after that, he ended his playing career. When he left the Nuggets, he was the holder of nearly every team record, including most career points, assists, games, minutes, along with the highest career scoring average for the team. And since then, some of those records were broken by Carmelo Anthony, some of them by Jokic, but English is still, in my opinion, a top 3 all-time player with the Denver Nuggets. He was elected into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in 2007. He scored 25,613 points, corralled 6,538 rebounds, and dished 4,351 assists in his career. He was the 8-time NBA All-Star, 3 times All-NBA second teamer. As I said before, he won the scoring title in 82-83. His number 2 was retired by the Denver Nuggets. His number 22 was retired by the South Carolina Gamecocks. And in coaching, he has been an assistant in the NBA. No longer is, but he was an assistant with the Hawks, the Sixers, the Toronto Raptors, and the Sacramento Kings. And in my opinion, I think it's disgraceful that Dame Lillard is considered a top 75 all-time player, but Alex English is not. I also think it's disgraceful that Adrian Dantley is not considered top 75. At this point in time, that tells me that there is a recency bias when it comes to the people who pick and choose who they think are top players. There's a bias there, and that shows also there's a lack of respect for the history of the game, and that's why I don't respect most of those clowns on ESPN or Fox Sports. And recent events shows you why we should have even less respect for them and how they got the job, how they got their gigs. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not going to hate on somebody for doing what they got to do to go up the ladder, but that still don't mean I got to respect your so-called knowledge of sports. When, what I'm saying, the only thing you seem to have knowledge of is, just how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it. Salute to Alex English, one of the all-time greats.